Okay, great. So, hi, Irene. Good morning. On the second day of Davos, would be really keen to hear what's going on in Davos and what that means for Dataswyft. What are the we've been hearing a lot of information coming out of the Davos events already about the role of the digital economy, data, views of governments and enterprises on mobilizing data and mobilizing trust in data ecosystems. Could you tell us a little bit about what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount of interest here in Davos and also beyond about the role that the digital and the data economy can in especially growing the economy. I think you see from Pakistan to Indonesia to many of the sort of global South countries as well that they are looking at being able to leapfrog into newer technology, AI, things like that. And I think the key aspects of all this is really about growth. It's around economic growth.
So if people are concerned, both in the private and government sectors, about harnessing the economic potential of data, what's the feeling there in Davos about the extent to which people have actually got access, whether they be organizations or people? How are they getting access to that data, even before it can be used for growth?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are two parts to this equation. The first part is access, and that leads to the second part, which is if you do have access, what is the value of that data, and what is the because that then impacts on access and the cost and the efficiency of access. So I think the world is kind of in a chicken and egg situation where somewhat conceptually they believe that's value, but they're not really sure where that value lies and in what kind of assets. Is it energy? Is it retail? Is it banking? Is it finance? And then they also don't know how to, or the identity. And there are questions around the distribution of these assets, which then again goes back to if you know what the distribution is, if you know what the market structure will be on the demand side, then you would negotiate the excess on the supply side quite differently.
So do you mean that there's potentially a lot of people, governments, organizations, individuals have access to the data, but there's no visible demand at the moment for them to actually use as a reason for getting access? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm actually saying that is a huge demand for information.
Okay.
And there is a huge supply of information, but the two don't connect because the information demand side wants is not the information supply side has. Or it's incomplete. So I'll give you a simple example. You've got universities, they've got skills data, degrees data, and training data. But on the demand side, employers are asking for verified CV. You see, the asset that connects to the demand side is verified CV, which has quite a number of information. And then the supply side is disparate organizations around work experiences. So you have this fundamental disconnect. It's valuable, you know it is, but there is a level of refining and transformation in the part of the market that hasn't yet coagulated to make that distribution channel more seamless and more efficient. And also the structure of that distribution does depend on the asset itself. If you're distributing skills and training and experience, it's quite different from distributing your name and your ID and who's doing it, who wants it on the demand side. So that's what I'm saying. So a lot of data market experiments is to join that up, is to say, what is it that you want and how much are you willing to pay for it on the demand side? And then go back and say, okay, you know what? This is incomplete, that is incomplete. And there's the role of an intermediary that has to make sure this is connected.
So you're saying there's a gap in the trust. How do I trust the data I'm being given, and that data needs to be modified or made useful by different intermediaries?
I'm not sure whether the word is trust. For example, on the demand side, you have quite a number of organizations getting data that is completely unverified. For example, the filling of forms. An individual can fill the form any way he chooses. There is no verification. And yet, if there is a way to make that form filling a bit more efficient, and if you are able to get verified information on the name and age and things like that, then of course it will become valuable and it will reduce friction. So it isn't so much, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are assets that you really do require trust. For example, if you are asking a person for a credit score, or you're asking a person for passport number, you have to know that the source is legitimate, right? But if you're asking the person to fill up a form to go into the building, or fill up a form for compliance reason to change money at the authorized money changer, in the manual analog way, there isn't any verification.
So there are varying degrees of levels of trust. So let me come back then to what's going on in Davos today. You implied at the beginning that governments are very much engaged in this debate. I have at least heard a lot about things like digital identity wallets and grand government-driven open data schemes. Are people talking about these things in Davos? And what role then do you think those initiatives play at this moment in time?
I think there is a lot of talk about digital identity, but I keep, and in here in Davos, I say this and I keep saying this, the verified national identity or digital identity is a hygiene factor. It is the basis to which a transaction can happen legitimately, but it's not the end. It is the basis of which other things can happen. For example, exchanging credit scores, or being able to give your health records. You kind of need some form of legitimate government identity or some form. But on its own, it's very hard. You think about it, in the manual analog world, what penetration does a passport have, and what's the purpose of a passport? If you look at giving out, the last time governments tried to give out something like that, which is a passport, the only reason people would get it is for border control, to be able to travel. So if you're not traveling, you're not going to get a passport. Who bother? You know, you have seen countries that don't need. So now you have another form of national digital identity.
Yeah.
What is it for?
So,
and I think that's a question in a lot of people's mind.
So let me ask you, I mean, in the current climate here of politics today, I mean, we just saw literally yesterday evening the inauguration of President Trump, surrounded by a lot of the leaders of big tech firms, which most of us are probably using on a day-to-day basis to manage our own personal information. And whether we like it or not, we're implicitly trusting. So,
Yes.
you know, what then, I mean, if these companies are already playing such an omnipresent role in the way we manage our own profiles and data today, what does the future hold, and what are people in the current climate in Davos talking about this juxtaposition between the role of the state and the role of big techs?
I think it boils down to the control over the asset, data itself. And I think we talk a lot about data, but we forget, and often we talk about the data together with the platform that generates it. So you lump them two together. You say, oh, Google, and therefore my data in Google, and therefore they control everything. Actually, if there is an ability that I own my data and Google provides me the services, all the wonderful services, this is actually good for Google, because I could provide some pieces of Google data to another service provider, and Google could benefit from it as well. So when we start to look at the future internet, there are places that Google doesn't go to. Homes, for example, IoT, for example. There are places that Facebook don't go into. Shops, for example. So the future internet is much, much larger. And I think even among the big tech companies, they want to have an understanding of how the markets could be more efficient while basically still preserving the freedoms of individuals. Now, I've said this before many times, I'll say it again. Data is our behavior. If we keep markets for data free, we keep our behaviors free. So, so the fundamental purpose is if we get to have choices, then the services we engage in would actually benefit from these choices. So it's not like, oh, they've kept everything in. They kept everything in because we were using services. The market is efficient because the platform is efficient. However, as we start interacting across different hours of the day and doing other things, we start moving our pieces of information. We want to prove certain activities, prove ID. We need a more fundamental way of thinking of how these data markets will
So
fall.
you mean the data market and the circumstances in which we're using our own data, whether we are people or organizations, is too broad for any one platform to manage.
Yeah, I mean, you can't eat the world. It's like, tomorrow I'll be talking a lot about the payment economy and how back in 1901, before there were banks, your employers used to pay for you. I mean, many of us are not alive around that time, but your employers used to pay your bills for you, pay your grocery bills because they paid you wages, and at the end of the month they'll pay your grocery bills. But it was too big for any employer in the world to pay everybody in the world, and hence we have payment economy today. It will go the same way for data.
But let me ask you a different question then. I mean, we've seen the evidence that especially in newer markets, emerging markets, even though we might theoretically want control over our data, a lot of the behavior we observe today is that people click through and don't necessarily want to manage the complexity of each time deciding what data they share. How do you see that? How do you see intermediaries, if at all, playing a role? Do customers want that control?
I think we want as much control over our data as we have over our money. Now, you can say, oh, do we want to manage our money? We do. We do, because the asset that started to be very difficult to manage and clunky, remember checkbooks and this and that, was really clunky to manage. And it became easier and easier. Today we have app, you can pull, you can push, it's easy. Data starts to become it's very clunky to start with. And also depends on what kind of data. Is it just a simple push that I fill up a form? Then I'm in control. What's the big deal? I think the problem when people talk about the complexity of managing our data, nobody wants to manage the whole thing. Everybody just wants to know that I'm in control to be able to push information when I want to, when I want to do something, and this will reduce the friction of me doing something. And that simple act of control, choice, and push, it's all they need. Now, what the intermediaries have to figure out, Dataswyft included, is to how do you get that experience down to such simple steps, and all the underlying infrastructure, security, compliance, everything is just all already done as hygiene, so that all the person has to do is just push, and he feels just as safe as pushing payment.
So if we project ourselves in the future, in a world where we are managing our data more readily, what do you made the parallel with banking. Do you think we're going to see a very fragmented world of data banking with lots of different actors, or with a very high concentration? What are the forces driving the way this intermediary type of service you're describing will develop? And will it be along national lines? Will it be around sectoral lines? What's your vision, you think?
I think from Dataswyft point of view, I can only speak from Dataswyft point of view. I wouldn't know what the rest of the sectors are doing. Dataswyft has been trying for the last year or so to find the simplest asset that allows a person to push a piece of data that grows a big market. And we believe we have found it. And of course, other intermediaries could find their own in terms of experience. But I think the thing here to solve is that piece of asset that is going to grow a big market soon. For us, we found, oddly enough, proofs. Proofs are the fastest moving asset in our network. It's crazy, but proofs are the fastest. Proof of work experience, proof of skill, proof of spending, proof after proof, because the consumer just wants to be able to tell a person and prove to the person, I've done that, I've done this, I have this, I have that. And proofs to us is the asset that has the fastest moving right now. It is odd because obviously some of these proofs are in the supply side, but some of these proofs that we have actually got to get it digitized, there isn't a supply for it.
There isn't a supply side, sorry?
There isn't a supply side for some of the proofs. So for example, in a farmer's data wallet, a proof that the farmer has done sustainable farming practices.
How do I prove that?
How do I prove that, right? That data isn't available.
So how are you going to create it?
Oh, so the data wallet basically picks the trusted person who has been verifying it manually to say, okay, you stand by, it was done, he proves it, he creates a digitized piece of data, now the farmer can prove it. He can go get his green finance. He can go get his financing for his farm because the manual verifier is willing to stand by that proof. And so we just digitize that.
But how do I trust the manual verifier?
Because right now, the verifier is the one that is proving it, is verifying it manually without the digital aspects.
Ah, so it's really digitizing what we're already trusting.
That's correct. That's correct. It's the same with the verified CV. We've got a whole bunch of recruiters in our network that's already verifying CVs for employers, and we're digitizing that.
Do you think this offers opportunities to not just trust the people we're already trusting, but to enhance in a world of everything that we're hearing about, fake news and digital fraud? Is it going to enable us to reduce uncertainty, to increase trust?
I think there are institutions we do trust in this world to deliver certain services. And I think, of course, I'm biased because, Dataswyft runs a data wallet. I believe that if that is digitized in a data wallet, then on the demand side, people then can, take that badge as a stamp for this video is true because, Reuters say it is, for example, and I think the distributed trust that's been digitized with a global world that already trusts them is the natural progression, and particularly all the AI.
So we will be able to take trust we have in institutions like the New York Times or Reuters, check in a way you're saying that they are who they are, they say, and build on that trust reputation to extend into the digital world.
Yeah, because they not just own the data, or they're not just a verifier of the supply side data. They are also the owner of the trust mark. And so if you have a distributed trust mark, assuming it's always on the left-hand corner of every video, then you have a market of distributed trust marks. I think, so it's layers of markets in this world.
Okay. So I'm gonna frame that term. I like that term, a distributed trust mark, which is something already I think we need to maybe revisit. Let's hold it there. I'm sure you've got a lot of other events to go to in Davos today, and I look forward to catching up and hearing what's transpired tomorrow, and hear about some of the newer topics and the further debate about trust markets and data. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Simon.